Welcome back, guys. Today we're talking tow rods, specifically how to install them on your 04 to 07 CTS-V. Full disclosure, guys, this car is absolutely filthy. It spends most of its time just sitting collecting dust. We were gonna wash it, but next week's forecast, full of rain. September in Oregon. First thing you wanna do is take the wheels off the car. If you have the OEM wheels, 6 lug, they're gonna be a 19 millimeter. We have a 5 lug swap on this car. It uses 22 millimeters. So let's go ahead and get these wheels off. Now that we have the wheel off, next you're going to want to remove the brake caliper. It's these 2 bolts here, and it uses an 18 millimeter. A good tool to have laying around is one of these S-hooks. I like using these for hanging the caliper so you're not putting any tension on this brake line. If you don't have one of these, you can go ahead and put it on top of the upper control arm. However, just be careful when you're doing the tow rods that you don't knock it off and the caliper falls and pulls on that brake line. So I'm just gonna hook it here and hook it on the e-brake cable. Make sure it's out of the way. Next, we're gonna take the rotor off. You might have a bolt here that holds the rotor onto the hub. Ours is missing because the hub doesn't have the threaded part to accept that bolt. I believe it's either a hex or a Torx, but I do not remember the size. Okay, next you're going to take this outer tow rod bolt off using a 21 millimeter. Next you're going to take this inner bolt off the tow rod. You can see the tow rod here, and it's up here in the frame. The head of the bolt is a 18 millimeter, and the nut is a 21 millimeter again. So I was able to get the nut off of the inner bolt on the tow rod. However, getting that bolt out was extremely tough since this suspension is in droop right now and putting a lot of load on that bolt. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna jack the suspension up to ride height. That way there shouldn't be any load on this tow rod and we can get the bolt out and get the tow rod out. So let's go ahead and do that. And just like that, the tow rod's out. Okay, now you're ready to set the length of your Creative Steel tow rod. First off, make sure that the grease zerks are both pointing the same direction, and make sure that the adjuster has the same amount of threads on each side. What you're going to do is you're going to take the bolts from the tow rod, slide them through the OEM tow rod, and use it as a guide. So you see how that's not the right length? Go ahead and adjust it until it fits in there. Now what I like to do is rotate this adjuster all the way one way, and then rotate it back the other way, and that's taking the slop out of these bolts in here, and so you can make sure you get to the center of it. So I'm going to count the flats. Okay, so just about 1 revolution, so I'm going to back it off a half a revolution, and that'll be right in the center. Okay, so right there. Now what you're going to do is you're just going to tighten up these 4 bolts on each side, and that'll hold it square so you can put it into the car. You want to tighten these up to 11 foot-pounds. I like to go back and forth between the two on one side. That way you're not putting all the pressure on just one and then the other. Okay, and another thing is make sure that you're pushing down on this thing, this tow rod, so you're going to keep it flat. So you don't want this to be like this. Okay, So that'll hold it nice and straight. We can go ahead and put that in the car. Don't worry about the jam nuts quite yet. We're gonna tighten those up once the tow rod is in the car. To install the tow rods, you're gonna need to remove this rear bolt on the trailing arm and lower the trailing arm a little bit. This is because the tow rods are larger than the factory ones, and they need this area right through here to be installed. So if you don't have our trailing arms, it's a 21 millimeter on the bolt and the nut. If you have our trailing arms, because the bolt is a bolt that we drill, it is a 22 on the head of the bolt. So let's go ahead and get that bolt out. Now that we got the trailing arm down, we can go ahead and install the tow rod in the reverse order that the OEM one came out. There's two things to note though. Make sure that the grease zerks are facing down, and if you have your caliper hanging like we do, make sure that when you put this tow rod in, you go underneath the brake line. And what I like to do is I like to get the tow rod in and get the inner bolt through the tow rod first, and then work on the outer bolt by prying this thing around to get this nub to stick inside there. But at least you're working on the outside of the car where it's easier to get to instead of the bolt on the inside, which is almost impossible to get to. Now we've got the inner bolt of the tow rod holding the tow rod in place. Now we're going to work on prying this knuckle around so we can get this outer bolt of the tow rod in and this rear bolt on the trailing arm in. Now you're going to want to go ahead and torque these bolts down. The outer tow rod bolt is 118 foot-pounds. The inner tow rod bolt is 125 foot-pounds. And the rear trailing arm bolt is 125 foot-pounds. Now you're going to want to make sure that you torque these down when the vehicle is at ride height. So I've got the jack underneath the vehicle right now at ride height. So let's go ahead and get these torqued down. Now we're ready to put the brake system back together. We're going to start with the rotor. And if you guys do have this bolt, it is 124 inch-pounds. So go ahead and install that now. We don't have that bolt, so we're going to move on to the caliper. We're going to get the caliper bolts in, and those are torqued to 88 foot-pounds. All right, quick note. If you guys need to use an extension, which I had to on this lower bolt, I would suggest bringing the torque spec up like 5 foot-pounds, just because you don't get as much torque using an extension. So. You're gonna install the wheel. Almost there. All right guys, I used the impact just to drive the lug nuts in. I didn't tighten it down. When we lower the car, we're gonna tighten these lug nuts. We're gonna torque them down to 140 foot-pounds. That's because we've done a 5 lug conversion on this with 14 millimeter studs. If you still have the 6 lug 12 millimeter studs, just factory, you're gonna do 100 foot-pounds. But if you do have like a V2 cradle swap or 14 millimeter studs, 140 foot-pounds. One thing I want to talk to you guys a little bit more about is greasing these. Yes, you'll need to grease these before you lower the car. However, 1 or 2 pumps is not going to do it. Reason being, the grease zerk is over here and there is a tube that runs along here, and then these inserts have a bunch of grease grooves in them. So you're going to need maybe 5 to 10 pumps on this thing on each side to get the grease all the way down the tube and sufficiently cover the bushings. Another thing is we highly suggest using our grease. This stuff has been formulated by us for our polyurethane bushings. It's thick, it won't wash out with water like a lot of the other greases will. You'll get some packets for like installation with the tow rods, and you'll notice how thick it is. But here, I'm gonna give you a little display. This stuff is, this stuff is thick, so we highly suggest getting our grease and then keeping the bushings greased so they don't squeak, and you get the longest life out of your bushings. And that's it, guys. Tow rods, easy job. Hour or 2 in the driveway, no problem. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out or give us a call, 503-316-1811. As always, like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next one.